Hello, welcome to Twinsburg Public Library webinars. Today's webinar is Excel 2013 Top 10 Tips for the Workplace. We're going to cover 10 quick tips that might make your work life a little easier when using Excel. At the end of the webinar there will be time for a Q&A, and if you want to ask questions about something unrelated to the topics covered, feel free. With that being said, let's begin. The number one tip is actually the easiest. It's toggling between the formula and result views in the cells. So by default, when you look into a cell, you see the result of a formula or function that you type instead of the actual formula or function. You have to click onto the cell to review the formula or function and the formula bar. You can actually hold down the control key and tap the tilde key on your keyboard to switch back and forth between seeing the function in the cell or the result. This is a really quick and easy way to format or change or edit functions and formulas more than one at a time. And just as a reminder, the tilde key has that little squiggly shape. It's right next to the number 1 on your keyboard up top, right above your tab key. The next tip is defining a name range for a cell. So if there's a set of cells that you refer to frequently in formulas or functions, you might want to give it a nickname so that you don't have to go back and highlight these cells over and over again. For example, in my column A, I have check numbers. Instead of going through and highlighting these check numbers every single time I need to refer to them, I can actually right-click onto the highlighted section and choose Define Name. Now I can give Excel this group of cells a nickname, so I might call it check numbers. Click OK. Oh, I have to enter a new one. I've already created that one. So I'll use You cannot use spaces, so there has to be characters throughout the name. I'm going to click OK. So now if I start to write a function or formula, I can actually type the equal sign and start writing my section name. If you have more than one section name defined, you can select from a list or select the one that you want directly by double-clicking on it. Notice that when I double-clicked on that check numbers, I now have selected this range of cells again. So one more time, to define a range of cells, click and drag to select your cells. Right-click on the highlighted region, choose Define Name. In the Name section, give your range of cells a name. Click OK. Now whenever you go back to type out a function or formula, you can refer to that range of cells by name. Alright, any questions about how to define a name? Okay. The third tip is view worksheets in the same workbook in separate windows. Occasionally you might have to work in multiple worksheets within the same workbook, and you might want to view them at the same time. In a typical Excel spreadsheet, you have to go one at a time into your worksheets. To break them into a separate window, you're going to go to the View ribbon. Up at the top we see New Window. Click the New Window command, and this will actually open up a second workbook. So if I make my workbook minimized here, and I'll minimize the one behind it, this is the same workbook, the same file that I am creating. Notice up at the top that it says 10 tips Excel :1, 10 tips Excel :3, because I double-clicked it instead of clicking it a single time. You can have as many versions or access to different windows as you need. When you make changes into a window, it does save it to the original file, so if you are working simultaneously in two worksheets, you can. And this is a quick way for you to go back and forth between the same worksheets, or if you're going to use formulas and functions that refer to cells in different worksheets, this is a great way to quickly keep track of that. You can quickly arrange your cells as well, so if I click Arrange All, I can choose how I want it to be arranged. It will put it in that order for me. When you're done, you can just close out one file or both files, or you can go back to your view ribbon. Close that. Oh, looks like I have a little window issue right here. There it is. When you close out your windows, we see our original window, 10 Tips Excel, intact. So again, that was tip number 3, viewing worksheets in the same workbook in separate windows. To do that, you're going to go to the View ribbon, New Window. Once you have your windows, you can arrange them however you like on the screen. In Excel, you have the ability to select cells to refer to them in functions or formulas across multiple worksheets or multiple workbooks. You're not limited by having all your data in the same workbook. So for example, if I was writing a formula and I wanted to find the sum of these cells and maybe another sheet, I can click on my sheet that I want to add the sum of. Let's see if I can find a number. So I'll add these. If I go back to my main screen, notice that I have the sum of F7, F18, comma, main exclamation point G2 colon G6. What this means translated from Excel is I'm finding the sum of the range between F7 and F18 on the current worksheet, and I'm adding the range of G2, G6 on worksheet main, which I know this is the worksheet name because the exclamation point denotes that for me. I hit enter on my keyboard and it will add the sum for those values. So again, start writing your function or formula. Select your first value or set of values, and then you can click on to the next sheet of your choice to select another value to add. You can also hold down the control key on your keyboard to select values that are not necessarily next to each other in your parentheses and hit enter. This does work across workbooks as well. So if I were to make this window a little smaller, and I'm going to quickly open up a second workbook. So these are two different files, two different workbooks. I'm going to find the sum of the values in this workbook plus the values in this workbook. Notice that when I go back to the second workbook and click and drag across these values, it adds it to my original formula. So here we have a cell that is finding the sum of the range of cells in the current workbook and in the second workbook. Again, I can tell it's pulling data from another workbook because the name of the workbook, the file name, is denoted by the bracket symbols. The sheet is denoted by the exclamation point. If I hit enter, here's the answer to the formula between the two workbooks. If you happen to know the shorthand, you can just type it directly. You don't have to click and drag to select your data. Just know that brackets are for file names, exclamation points are for sheet names. Once you get used to typing this language of Excel, you can just quickly type it. You won't have to click and drag. So that was tip 4, selecting data and other worksheets or workbooks. Occasionally you might have to format spreadsheets to look similar, but they contain different sets of data. So for example, down here I have, oops, my screen went black. That was Windows readjusting its color. So down here I have Format Sheet 1 and Format Sheet 2. Did everyone get the screen back? Can everyone see me still? Okay. I want them to be the same formatting even though they may not contain the same data. To do that, you're going to hold down the control key on your keyboard, click and drag across the sheets. Oops, that's a copy. To do that, you're going to click on the sheet name, hold down the control key on your keyboard, and select the other sheet names that you would like to include in the same formatting style. Note that if you click on a sheet, it will be part of the selection. So I'm going to format this one. Okay. going to format this one to have all bold text. Make it italic. Maybe I'll make this color blue. I'll make the text a different color. Make it dark green, and I'll give it a light background. So I like this formatting. Now if I click into the next cells and format same 2 or format same 1, we see the same formatting no matter where I switch between these sheets. So again, if you want to format the same style between two sheets, you're going to click on the sheet you want to format, hold down the Control key on your keyboard, select the next sheet that you want the similar formatting for, and then go back and change the formatting how you want it to appear. So that was tip number 5. Control click to select multiple sheet tabs to create the same formatting styles. Tip number 6. Freezing your headings. By default, when you are using Excel and you scroll down to the spreadsheet, the user-created headings or category titles disappear. So if you're using a large Excel spreadsheet and you're not used to where you are, you can easily forget which category you're working in. So for example, column E or column F, which one's the actual, which one's the budgeted amount. To save you time from having to go back, scroll back up to see which category you're working in, you can freeze headings. So if you go to the View ribbon, Freeze Headings, your choices are to freeze panes, freeze top rows, freeze first column. If I freeze the top row, notice that it only freezes the title of my spreadsheet, which is Budget for 2007. So if you ever come across a spreadsheet where you have multiple layers or multiple cells as part of the heading sections, that doesn't work. Now if check number, date, category, if these were up in the row 1, that would have been perfect. In this case, if I go to freeze, unfreeze, I actually want to select cells. The first option, freeze panes, will freeze anything above the selected cells and freeze anything to the left of the selected cells. So if I go through and I highlight row 3 because my headings are above row 3 and row 2, go to freeze panes, and scroll down. Both row 1 and row 2 will travel with me in the spreadsheet. And you can do this, freeze panes, unfreeze panes, you can do this no matter how many cells you want above. So if I want everything above row 11, 1 through 10 to be frozen, I can select row 11, freeze panes, the first option. As I scroll down, 1 through 10 travel with me. Likewise, if I freeze panes, unfreeze my current selection, I can freeze everything before column D by highlighting column D, selecting freeze panes, and freezing the panes. Now A, B, C, D, or A, B, C all travel with me. Freeze panes, unfreeze panes. So here we have the spreadsheet without the freezing. Text to columns, tip number 7. If you've ever gotten a spreadsheet where someone has typed someone's entire name into a single column and you needed them separated, this next tip will save you a lot of time. Especially if you're using mail merge or any kind of program that needs to have these names separated. Here's a quick way to do that. You're going to highlight the column or row that you need to have the data separated. We're going to go to your data ribbon, and the text to columns command is located in the data tools group. When you click text to columns, it's going to ask you how you would like to separate your column. Typically you're going to use delimited because there's a character or something that cues the separation. Fixed width means that there is a specific size that you want to start, so within so many parts of a centimeter you want to move over. The delimited is the number 1 choice, we're going to use that, go to next, and then we have to choose what our delimiter is. In this case, because we have a space in between the first and last names, I'm going to mark space as my delimiter. If your data has commas in between that you need to separate, semicolons or tabs, you can do so by clicking on the appropriate selection. If you have a different one besides space, comma, semicolon, tab, you can select other and type the delimiter you would like to use in the other box. Once you select your delimiter, click Next. You can define a data format, so if you're working with text specifically, you can select text. You can select date if you're working with date specifically, or if you don't have a particular format you're following, you can use the general. General or text will work with separating name, separating text. So if I hit Finished, it says we can't do that with a merge cell. That's because up at the top I have a merge cell, which is Budget 2007. If I highlight the text that I want to be separated, I can go through the process again. It's going to warn you that there's already data there. Do you want to replace it? I'm going to cancel that. Notice that in my column E I have the actual amount. So if I were to separate text to columns, what Excel does is it cuts the second part of the text and pastes it into the next column. So when you're working with text to columns, make sure you're not working with the merge cell, and make sure you have inserted a blank column for Excel to paste that information in. Now, if I were to do the same thing, notice that we have my first name, my last name, into the separate columns. So again, that was tip number 7, text to columns. Make sure you don't have a merge cell, and make sure you insert a new column or row for the data to go into. You can hide columns or rows, so if you don't want to deal with the data right now, you can hide it. So if you select the data you want to hide, right-click, choose Hide. Now I don't have to look at that piece of information. I don't need it right now. You can get it back by highlighting the columns or rows that are surrounding the hidden one. Right-click, Unhide. If you want to highlight or hide multiple columns or rows that are not next to each other, you can by using the Control key to select the columns or rows you would like to hide. Again, right-click, Hide. If you have columns or rows that are hidden throughout the document and you need to unhide them all, select the entire document by clicking on the corner between right between the row and the column starters. This highlights your entire spreadsheet. From here you can right-click and unhide. And that will show everything that is hidden within that spreadsheet. Data validation. You can limit your selection for Excel. So if you have a spreadsheet that you are creating for, oh, I almost skipped one, I'm sorry, tip number 9, hiding sheets. So just like with hiding columns and rows, you can hide entire spreadsheets. So here I see my Hidden Sheet tab. I'm going to hide the sheet. Again, you're going to right-click and choose Hide. This hides your entire spreadsheet. It still exists in the file, but now you don't have to deal with it at the moment. To unhide it, move your cursor down to the Sheet tabs, choose Unhide. A list will pop up of all the hidden sheets. You can have multiple hidden sheets. Select the one you want, click OK, and that brings it back. Hidden sheets come in handy with data validation, which is actually the next tip. Data validation allows you to limit choices, especially if you have an Excel spreadsheet you're sharing amongst coworkers or if you're using with the general public. So if I go down to my drop-down list tab, I can actually, if I click into my column K, you'll notice that a little arrow appears in my cells. That's because I limited the choices that can go into the cell, or I offered a drop-down list for my users to choose from. To create that is actually called data validation. I'm going to highlight my column J, and I want these cells to have some sort of a data validation rule. I'm going to click on data validation, which is found on the data ribbon. Click data validation. First, you have to set what type of data validation you want. So in this case, I want a drop-down list. Then I have to choose a source. I can type it out directly, so if I only want my users to select from 1, 2, 3, I can type 1, 2, 3 and then delimitate them with commas so that Excel knows that those are separate choices. Or I can also select from a spreadsheet. So if I click on this little icon, it lets me see more of my spreadsheet. I can click onto any sheet I want to select my data. Once I finish selecting my data, I can click OK, or if I want to give an input message, so I can show an input message when that cell is selected, please make sure you select from the drop-down list. So oops. I can also create an error alert. So if someone doesn't do what they're supposed to, if someone doesn't follow the instructions, you can actually create your own Windows error message. And then click OK. So now, if I were to go into the cell, I can select from those list items. What's great about using the hidden sheet is now if I hide this, I still have access to those data pieces. So you can use hidden sheets as a way to keep track of input and then hide it so that if you don't want to format it or use it in any other way, you can hide it and keep it out of the way. The other type of data validation is date. So if I do data validation, I can go to Settings, choose the type of data validation I want. In this case, it's date. And then I can tell my users to only type dates in between January 1st, 2014 and January 1st, 2016. So I only will allow dates entered between these two. Again, I can create an error message. Click OK. And if I go and type in the correct dates, it accepts it. If I type in the wrong date, I get my error message, wrong date, please type, what have you. So then your users can retry and then type in the correct date. So again, that was data validation. You're going to choose the type of data validation. You can do date, you can do list as I just showed you. You can choose other options as well. If you want to do an input message, that's okay, but really if you do an error message, that will work. If you click error message, type the title of the error and what the user did wrong. So those were the top 10 tips for the workplace. We have the toggle between formula and result view and the cells by using CTRL tilde. We defined a name of a range of cells so that we can always refer to those same cells in any function or formula without having to go back and select them again and again. We learned how to view worksheets in the same workbook, but in separate windows. So if we need to simultaneously edit or work in multiple sheets within the same workbook, we can do so. We learned how to select data in other worksheets or workbooks just by using your mouse to click on the particular cell you want to use in your function or formula. Note that once you get used to the language of Excel, you can probably start typing it directly. We've also learned how to use CTRL Click to select multiple sheet tabs to create the same formatting. It does not copy the data, it just copies the formatting styles. You can freeze headings with multiple headers. For example, the way we see my header set up on the spreadsheet with budget for 2007 title, and then the different categories on the second row. So if I want both 1 and 2 to travel with me, we learned how to freeze headings for those. We learned how to split text to columns. So if someone types in the first and last name in the same column, but you need them in separate columns, you can do that. Remember, you have to make sure you're not using a merge cell, and you also have to insert a new column in order to split them without deleting previously entered data. We also learned how to hide columns and rows by right-clicking and choosing Hide, unhide by right-clicking and choosing Unhide. You can hide entire spreadsheets by clicking on the tab, right-clicking, choosing Hide. To unhide entire spreadsheets, you right-click, choose Unhide, and then select from a list. Data validation. So this limits your users to what they can or cannot put into the cell. You can do this, you can select different ways of validating your data. We looked at how to use a list and how to use